Welcome to Polymer Clay TV. I'm Kira, and today we've got some new and we hope informative programming for you. We wanted to start talking about some of the basic and more advanced techniques, and today I'm going to talk to you about attaching polymer clay to non-porous surfaces like glass and tile. So one of the reasons for this is because we have the Polymer Clay Tribe, which is a Facebook group that can be found at www.polymerclaytribe.com, and there are over 12,000 people in there posting their work all the time, and lots of questions come up. So we also see a lot of polymer clay artwork passing through the feed, and a lot of people have been putting polymer clay on things like coffee cups and tiles, and I just wanted to address some of the things that I've seen and try to help you make your polymer clay artwork better. So let's talk about glue and mechanical connections. When you want to attach your polymer clay to a surface that is shiny and non-porous, you have two choices really. You can either make your polymer clay object and stick it on and bake it and then remove it and glue it on again after the fact. Or you can make what's called a mechanical connection, which would mean you'd be taking the clay and somehow wrapping it around the object so that the object becomes embedded in the clay. Now, when I'm doing my polymer clay, I tend to want to make that mechanical connection. And the reason for that is because glues and other chemicals can react with the clay, and unless you know something is 100% tested and it's going to work over time and not break down, your best bet is to make sure that the clay is wrapping around the object. Polymer clay is such a new art medium, and you might make something and say, hey, I touched it a year later and it was totally fine. But the chemicals in different products can take a lot of time to break down your clay. So maybe in 5 years, your object could fall apart. Unless you're using something that the polymer clay community has tested and it's tried and true and it's been around for quite some time and you know that it's not going to react with the clay. So I always try to choose doing some kind of connection where my clay is wrapping around some part of the object and then bake it so that later on it's not going to fall off. Now, one of the most common things that I've seen lately is art on a coffee cup. And in most cases what you see is like a piece of something, a little scene or a little figurine or leaves and flowers or something just kind of stuck on the front of a coffee cup. Now, your polymer clay may stick really well to the glass. After baking, you might notice that it's stuck on there and you think, it's not going to fall off. But the thing is, if you're putting it on a coffee cup, you're expecting that people are going to fill that coffee cup with hot liquids, which causes the glass to expand and contract, and that they're going to wash it, which means handling it and touching it. So the recommendation here is that you would bake the piece on the cup so that it retains the shape. Usually most coffee cups are curved. And after baking that, you would pop it off and use some kind of glue to stick it back on. If you are just making it for yourself and you don't care if it falls off sometime down the road, you can always glue it back on, then that's fine. But if you're selling it, then you really have to pay attention and make sure that your customer doesn't end up with pieces that are falling off of the mug or the tile or whatever it was that you created for them. Another thing that you might want to do if you're doing a design on a mug or something with a handle is to make part of the design wrap around the handle. Go through, around, and enclose it. This will make sure that your polymer clay design has something to anchor to something holding it in place so that it doesn't just fall off later. So these are design choices that you make while you are creating your piece. So let's talk about glue. And the first one I want to talk about is the one that you should not use for this application. A lot of people love Weld Bond, and I'll do Weld Bond in another video coming very soon. This is for porous objects. So this is not the glue to use for glass and tile. So we'll set that one aside. So you have some choices. You can use a traditional epoxy, and that is a two-part liquid. You can see the bubbles in there. This epoxy hasn't been opened yet, but this is pretty easy to use. You just snip off the ends, and you use this plunger to plunge out equal amounts of the two sides. And you can either stir it with a plastic spoon or something, but my favorite way to use this, and also resins, small amounts of resins, like ice resin is a jewelry type resin that comes in a similar packaging. I think this part is black, and epoxy looks kind of yellow. The ice resin looks much clearer than this, but it's in a similar package. So you can get a little Ziploc and pour or plunge the epoxy right into it, and then close the Ziploc, mush it together for a couple minutes to mix it, and snip off the bottom to pour it out. And that is the way I prefer to do it, because I would never use all this epoxy in one sitting. It's just a lot. The only issue when you have this type of bottle is that you have to then store it upright so that it doesn't just ooze out when you're done using a small amount. Okay, so that's traditional epoxy. Then there's this product, which is Epoxy Sculpt. And this is more of it's a two-part putty that you can use. And this is just a very small sample package. But it's a two-part putty, and you mix equal parts of A and B. It's a lot like Amazing Mold Putty, if you're familiar with that. This happens to be white, so the A side is whatever color the putty is going to be. And the B side is this sort of gray color. And over time, it oxidizes and turns this funky color, which you can peel that off to get to the gray underneath. It's just oxidation. So you want it to be this color when you're using it. So just peel that back and get rid of this gummy part that when it touches the air, that's what happens. But it's still usable underneath. Okay, so you just peel off equal parts of that. And for putting like this on the front of the coffee cup, you would only need about a pea-sized ball of it, and you just mush it on the back, stick it down, and let it dry. It takes about 24 hours. So that's more of a putty instead of the runny liquid that the epoxy would be. And then, of course, there is the super glues. Now, I found this one in the model section at Hobby Lobby. You know, the plastic models of cars and airplanes and things that people like to make? So this is Extreme Power Medium. It was $3, and I use this all the time. This is a cyanacrylate glue, which is basically super glue. So if you wanted to, and generally speaking, I use this for smaller things. For example, I made these earrings on a previous show you can probably find back in our channel using a mold and a rubber stamp, but I baked the chain here, and after it was done baking, removed it and super glued it down with this stuff. The other one that you could use is called Gorilla Glue, and I often use that as well. So I just thought this was cool because I found it in the model section, and it's obviously made for putting together plastic, which is really what your polymer clay is made of. So it's a plastic bonding glue, and I like it, and I've used it. These earrings are a year or two old, so I know that that works. Okay, so then the other question is the mechanical bond. Now, with cup chain, which is what that is, it's a piece of chain with all the little crystals in it. It's harder to make that bond where you're sticking it into the clay because there is a chain behind it. With a crystal, just a regular crystal, I've got some nice size vintage Swarovskis here so you can see what I'm doing. You want to try to make that mechanical bond by really pressing it in and then encouraging the clay to come up around the crystal so that it's captured. If you want the crystal to be sitting more on top of the clay and you don't want that effect of having it pushed in like that, you can make the indent and bake the crystal just like that. And after it's done baking, use a tool or something to pop it out of the little space that's made. So I'll just pretend that it's baked. But you would want to pop it out of that space. Put a drop of super glue in there. And then stick it back down so that it stays forever. So you have two choices. The mechanical bond, which, you know, another thing you could do to make that look prettier is even do some little decoration around it. You know, if you make little balls, take your small silicone tools. You can make a decorative edge going around the crystal that will both decorate and hold it in. So you have choices when you're planning a piece on how you want to do that. Do you want your crystal to look like it's floating on the top and you're going to pop it out and glue it in later? Or do you want to do some decorative elements around the crystal to really make sure that it is held in there? And it doesn't have to be balls. It could be a little rope. You could make little designs. The point is that your clay is capturing the edges of the crystal so it doesn't fall out. Okay, so I hope that that was a little bit informative for you about how to get your clay to stick to the shiny things like glass and tile and even metal. We'll see you next time on Polymer Clay TV.